Um, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm currently the interim director of the Center for Global Studies, and we're just delighted to be part of this event. I just thought I'd give you a little history in terms of the context of the GAP program. Back in 2001, when I was at Pitt as the senior international officer, that is the head of the University Center for International Studies, I realized at that point in time that Pitt was very strong in area studies, but it really didn't have a program focusing on trans-regional, transnational issues and processes. So back in 2001, we created a global studies center, or it wasn't a center then, it was a program. And it had at that time two legs. One was the Global Studies Certificate for undergraduates and graduates, and graduate students, that is, and that it has now become, that Global Studies Certificate, the most popular of all the certificates in international studies. The other leg was GAP, the Global Academic Program. And what we wanted to do with GAP was to create interdisciplinary research teams where faculty from different schools and departments would come together to establish productive working relationships with universities abroad. And the focus was for Pitt faculty to concentrate on developing real world solutions to global challenges and to create coursework based on their research. And being away from Pitt and now coming back after 20 years and having this opportunity to introduce this conference, I am so delighted to say that the current winners of the GAP have truly met what we set out as the objectives. And so beyond crisis creativity, imagining new futures through art and youth activism fits perfectly the goals that we set out back 20 years ago. So on behalf of the entire Global Studies Center team, I wish you a very productive on-conference, and I look forward to learning more as you proceed. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, William. So I'm just going to provide a very brief introduction of this week's events and of our speaker tonight. So I'm Caitlin Bruce. I'm an associate professor of communication here at the University of Pittsburgh and one of the current fellows for the Global Academic Partnership that William so nicely described. So this has been the culmination of about 3 years of ongoing programming, especially within the context of pandemic time. We offered a number of lectures from 2019 and 2020, and now we have a series of events this week. So this has also been carried out in collaboration with my colleague, Ricardo Klein, who's from the University of Valencia. So he will be joining us on Zoom throughout the week, and he's been a really great collaborator in this work. So I want to first thank the Global Studies Center for all of their support. This is a really unique opportunity to curate conversations across borders with colleagues from multiple institutions around the world. And I mean, this is really the very best part of the job that we get to do. In particular, I would like to thank Veronica, Maya, Henry, Eric, Mac, and the other staff and interns doing really crucial behind the scene work. This is a ton of logistics, especially as you can see in the setup, trying to make a hybrid event. So I'm very, very grateful for their support. I also want to thank Kirsten Scott and Lee Patel for thinking with me throughout the planning process and helping me really conceptualize of this unconference. And Christine Choi, who's my research assistant and really helped a lot with publicity. Thanks also to the Center for Latin American Studies for additional financial and logistical support, the Society to Preserve the Millvale Murals of Moxo Vanca for co-sponsoring and sharing tonight's event, and also to all of our participants for making the trip, for some of you a very, very, very long one. So I really cherish the gift of your presence. So we talked a little bit about translation logistics. So if you haven't already, please select your preferred language. I'm going to say just a tiny bit about context and then introduce our illuminous speaker. So this unconference, which is titled Beyond Crisis Creativity, Imagining New Futures Through Art and Youth Activism, explores how cultural organizations made up of artists, of young people, of cultural workers, of organizers and neighbors take up supposedly devalued city spaces to create new vocabularies and heuristics for value, beyond exchange value. And they use cultural practices to tell stories of place and forge transnational connections. Our speakers are also mapping out how certain forms of creative identity are commodified and also how they are rendered valuable. And so we're seeking to create a conversation across borders, cultures, institutions, as well as generations. There's a lot of details on our website. I'll just preview that we have a film screening coming up tomorrow in this room, same time. And then 2 panel discussions, one on Saturday morning, one on Sunday morning. All are free and open to the public, and you can register on Zoom. So tonight we will have a keynote from Njaimeh Njie, and I could think of no one better to start this series of events. Njie is a multimedia storyteller. Her photography, filmmaking, oral history, writing, and public artwork explore contemporary Black experiences with a particular focus on how the past shapes the present. Njie's work has been featured in outlets including CityLab and Belt Magazine, exhibited in spaces including the Carnegie Museum of Art and the Mattress Factory Museum, and she's presented at venues including TEDxPittsburghWomen and Harvard University. Among several awards and grants, Njie was named the inaugural Edward Mitchell Bannister Artist in Residence at Brown University for 21-22. Congratulations. And the 2019 Visual Artist of the Year by the Pittsburgh City Paper. Njie earned her BA in Film and Media Studies in 2010 from Washington University in St. Louis. And the talk is titled Exterior Landscapes, Interior Lives on Photography and Mapping the Cultural Memory of the City. Please join me in welcoming Njaimeh Njie. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Thank you all for having me. Okay, I'm gonna try to get my bearings here. So I'm gonna talk to you all, but also try to talk to you all. So let's see. And I'm also on 2 computers, so let's see how this goes. It's good though, keeps you on your feet. So again, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share a little bit about my work. And I look forward to learning more about the work of the other conference attendees. Again, my name is Njaimeh. I'm a photographer, filmmaker, multimedia producer. I'm from Pittsburgh, born and raised. As Caitlin shared, I went away to school. I did my undergrad in St. Louis, stayed there for an additional 3 years, teaching high school English, and I was also a basketball and a track coach, before coming back to Pittsburgh to transition into a career in media and art. So today I'm just gonna be kind of giving an overview of my work, but looking at 3 projects in particular that I think kind of speak to why we're here together at this conference. So yeah, we'll just kind of get into it. Maybe. Okay, we're doing the scroll method here. Oh, see, learn something new every day. And I'm gonna admit someone to the waiting room. All right, so I started, let me time myself here. All right, so I started my work really making images about Black women and girls in Pittsburgh. When I moved back to Pittsburgh from St. Louis, I was struck by the fact that there were a lot of narratives about Black women in the city of Pittsburgh, but few of them actually centered Black women in Pittsburgh. And I wanted to know how the women and the girls that I'm in community with felt about themselves and each other. And so Powered by Grace, Musings on Black Womanhood was the first project that I took on. I made pictures, I interviewed Black women and girls, really just trying to get a sense for what we have to say about our own lives. I was able to continue similar work to this in a collaboration with an esteemed friend and colleague, Mamfatou Niang, who was, like I was interviewing Black women and girls in Pittsburgh, she was interviewing Black Muslims in France. And I was able to travel to Paris with her to make portraits of some of the folks that she was interviewing in the project Paris Noir. So that helped me really kind of gain more of a global understanding of this conversation that's happening across the diaspora about what it's like to be a Black person in the dominant culture in predominantly white spaces. But it always comes back, at least it has so far, to the Pittsburgh region for me. Another example is a project like Tracing Water, Memory, and Change, where again, I'm interviewing folks, I'm making portraits, but this time I'm using the land, so the actual Ohio River, as a gateway to storytelling and to accessing histories about Black people and our experiences in Western Pennsylvania. That's a self-portrait that I made that ended up on the cover of this book, an anthology, Black in the Middle. And I share that because I am one of many people doing work that looks at identity through a regional lens. So I just wanted to kind of give a little plug to the book and to some of those other folks as well. Ultimately, my work is concerned with people and place, the intersection of people and place. As I've kind of reflected on my practice over the years, I think my goals are threefold. One, I want to, in my work, in my storytelling, go back and get the past and bring it to the present. I want to capture and preserve a bit of the present for today. And I also want to preserve some of the present for tomorrow, for future generations. I'm gonna come back to each of those three things, but I just wanted to put those out there as like the tenets that are gonna guide this presentation and that also guide my work. So the first of the three projects that I'm gonna speak about is On the Daily, Blackness in a Changing City. This was an exhibition created for the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts, where I was awarded the 2018 Emerging Artist of the Year in Pittsburgh Award. I'm gonna talk about one series in particular. And in this series, I wanted to pair images of people like Black residents in Pittsburgh with specific locations in the city. But I also wanted to create a text narrative that accompanied those images, almost to simulate a narrative of walking or moving through the city, but doing so with keeping Black people and Black experiences at the forefront of our minds as we move through space. So this was the first image. So if you have been to Pittsburgh, if you come to Pittsburgh now, you'll know it's a place of hills and valleys and waterways. So this particular image was made in the Hill District. It's overlooking the north side and the northern suburbs of the city. But I went to this place because two separate people told me stories about this particular plot of land. One of those people was a woman named Helen Sheehan. She's an Irish woman, born and raised in Ireland, but her family immigrated to the United States, to Pittsburgh, to the Hill District, to this plot of land in the 1910s. And they lived here before moving back to Ireland. But she came to Pittsburgh looking to trace some of her family history, and she traced it again back to the house that used to stand right here. In a totally separate conversation, I learned of the Penny family, who also called this plot of land home in the 1950s. And so you go there today, the 1950s and many decades on. So you go there today and there are really no houses left, but you still get this overlook, this vista of the city. And right next to it, right next to where I was standing is actually the former, like the bones of an incline that used to go from the Hill District down to the Strip District, where the factories and the mills were and where people worked for a living. And so you can stand in a place like this and imagine all the people who lived their lives in the city. And really, I think about how we're still living out the legacies of what happened across the land. But when you zoom in, you start to see even more of those legacies kind of hashed out across the built environment. On the left, you have the legacy of urban renewal, where whole highways were built through standing neighborhoods where often Black folks lived and immigrants and poor folks. And these highways, carried commuters who relocated out of the city to the suburbs. They carried them out to their homes and they carried them back into the city, but there was very little interaction with the people left in those neighborhoods. And on the right, you have the legacy of public housing and the destruction of public housing. This image was made of what used to be St. Clair Village. And I was struck when I went there because it looks like a bomb was dropped on this site, but people lived their whole lives right here on this street, where now there's nothing tangible left for us to recognize it as a neighborhood other than the stop sign and the fire hydrant and the street lights. And so I wonder, where did the people go? I wonder, when these communities were intact, how did people relate to each other? What were those family and chosen family and kinship networks like? I don't have to wonder too much, because we are still here. And so in my work, I try to privilege the fact that through the hardships, through the struggles, through, like a picture on the left, the destruction of these communities, there are and there have been people holding them together and holding each other together and building each other up. That's why I was pairing, again, the images of people in place, to think about the juxtaposition of our lives within the context of the built environment. Even with displacement and gentrification, there are people who show up as their full selves and contribute to the communities and the culture. But things change. We see them changing every single day. I made these images 4 years ago, and almost all of these places have changed since I made them. And so I think about, this gentleman here, who's probably about my age. Our parents might have encountered these storefronts as bustling businesses. We probably encountered them for a lot of our lives as boarded up storefronts. His daughter, who, I came across them eating lunch at the taco truck, is probably gonna get more of a view like the storefront on the right, this bright, shiny, gleaming new business in this rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. So I wonder, where do we all fit in to these neighborhoods? I think a common thread is resistance among this push and pull of the forces that have kind of made life difficult. We have been in place, kind of working to create these lives for ourselves. This image on the right, I call it push and pull because there's a phone booth in the foreground, which is kind of obviously a relic of the past. But in the background is this sign on a church marquee saying, "Embracing the future," right? So we're constantly caught in the midst of that push and pull. Folks from Pittsburgh will probably recognize Jamil's as a long-standing business in the community, right up the street from this image made on the right, which was the former Penn Plaza Apartments, which was affordable housing for decades. A long battle was waged for Penn Plaza to stay in existence, to stay standing. It was torn down. A very large complex of condos and retail is going up there as we speak. But for this brief moment, if you stood at the top of these stairs, as I did, you could kind of see this hallowed ground with a very prominent tech company like right behind it, and the community of East Liberty behind that. So just thinking about, what we can document of the present that has these kind of time traveling implications, past, present, and future, all together in the frame. And this was the final image from that series. It's very difficult to see, but Alicia B. Wormsley's sign, her saying, she wouldn't really call it hers, but the words that she created, there are Black people in the future. Someone, a resident of this building, which is in the Homewood neighborhood of Pittsburgh, turned the sign on its side to fit it in the window. And to me, that is exemplary of what we do every day, right? You turn, you fidget, you make things work in a place where, like this staircase, access might be difficult. You might not know how you're gonna get to that next place, but you find a way to make it work. The next project, see how I'm doing on time? All right, coming along. The next project is Homecoming, Hill District, USA. This was a public art project. It started as a commission through the Office of Public Art and Neighborhood Allies, which are two organizations here in Pittsburgh. I was paired with a community organization. I was one of several artists working across several neighborhoods, but I was paired with the Hill House Association to create a public art project that would essentially be community centered. It took about 3 years to execute in full with a lot of help from a lot of community members. But for those who don't know, the Hill District is a historic neighborhood in Pittsburgh. Once an immigrant enclave for folks coming to America. While Black folks were really always there, it transitioned into a predominantly Black neighborhood, starting in around the time of the Great Migration, and has stayed a predominantly Black neighborhood for generations since. I grew up hearing about images like this on the left, Wiley Avenue days, this bustling community full of art and jazz and businesses and nightlife. Places like the Crawford Grill, which you can kind of see next to the streetcar tracks closest to us on the left. And then on the right, you have a picture from inside the Crawford Grill of Louis Armstrong and George Brown from the Pittsburgh Courier, which is one of, if not the most storied Black newspapers in the country. So you have all this history happening on this land. And then, like many places in the country and like many places in the world, you have this story of destruction. Approximately a third of the Hill District was razed to create, it's a little bit hard to see, but to create this building called the Civic Arena, which was a performance venue that stood for a few decades in the Hill District. But you have all this life, all this culture, all this history just kind of physically wiped out with the hum of a few bulldozers. But that legend and those community bonds lived on in many ways, because at the end of the day, you could talk about the story and you could talk about the destruction and the construction, but it was people in the middle of that, like Mr. Art on the right with his family who lived in the Lower Hill. And the Lower Hill was raised in the mid-1950s. And so when I began this project, I started by going to different folks in the neighborhood and just, having conversations. What does public art mean to you? What might you want to see of a public art project in the neighborhood? Terry Baltimore, who was my partner through the community organization in this project, a legendary Hill District griot, keeper of the history, she pointed me to this place called the Court of Ideas, which was constructed by community members and Carnegie Mellon University students and professors, right behind the New Granada Theater. And it was a place that they built with their hands where people could literally come to speak and talk and convene and build. I passed this plot of land more times than I could count in the course of my life, and I never knew it was there, because by the time I came around, it had been filled and it just looked like a vacant lot. And so my thought was, well, dang, this history is literally all around us. We're walking on it all the time. We're moving through space on top of it. So what can we unearth in terms of the stories that people are holding? And when I had those conversations with people, they said that that's what they wanted to see. They wanted to see everyday stories told. This was not like as fluid a process as I'm about to present to you, but this is basically what happened. So I started doing archival research. I went to the library, I went to the history center, anywhere that had an archive or history that like individuals or organizations was keeping about the Hill District. I went to see what was in it. I can't play that. So I conducted about 50 oral history interviews. They started off very informally, and eventually I got into a little bit more of a system, but I really was curious about people's recollections of the neighborhood, how they got there, what were key places they remembered, what were key moments in time, how would they describe the neighborhood, how would they describe their neighbors and themselves. I was making pictures all along the way. So I was going to the community center, day camp with permission, the coffee shop, just trying to get a feel for like what the current everyday slice of life in the neighborhood felt like. And eventually, as I was doing these oral history interviews, I started asking folks like, hey, like, might you have any pictures of your life in the Hill District or your family that feel like they reflect this history that you've shared with me? And people turned up all sorts of gems, things that maybe wouldn't end up in a history book, but they're just as important because that's how we all mark our lives, right? With our mantle pictures and our photo albums and our school pictures. And that's what I feel very grateful that people shared with me. So that was all fine and good, but they were like knocking on the door like, okay, girl, you have to like make a project. You have to put something into the public realm. So again, through Terry's assistance, we kind of came upon this building. This is the side of August Wilson, the legendary playwright, his childhood home. It's currently under construction, becoming a very grand cultural space, but back in 2017, this is what it looked like. They had just torn down the adjacent building. And so when I went to visit the site, the first thing I noticed was the outline of the house that was next door. And so, across all these conversations that I'd had, people were just describing the Hill as, well, two main things. One, a home, right? This is my physical home, like the structure of a house, but this neighborhood is all the things that home is. And they also described the Hill as the village, whether it was an 80 or 90-year-old or a 25-year-old, they talked about this village that had raised them. So I said, okay, I think I can work with the idea of a home as a motif in a physical public art installation. So I started combing through the archives. I should have mentioned those two earlier pictures that I showed of Wiley Avenue and of the Crawford Grill were made by the legendary Teenie Harris, Mr. Charles Teenie Harris, who was a photographer working for the Pittsburgh Courier, but also working as an independent artist with a photo studio. His archives live at the Carnegie Museum of Art. There are over 80,000 negatives and prints there that he made. This is another image from Mr. Harris. And I kept seeing this floral wallpaper in all these images that I was going through. I saw it in the archives. I saw it in my own family's albums, like this picture of my mom and her grandfather and their childhood, or excuse me, in her childhood home in Homestead. This floral wallpaper kept coming up. So essentially, I built out a room, what was meant to feel like a room, in Photoshop. And I started going through the images that I had made and the images that were gifted to me that I was able to scan. And I started putting people, all images made within the Hill District, but putting people from different eras and different locations in the same frame together. Sorry about that. Forgot he was there. Oh, forgot everyone was there. I can go back. Thank you. So yeah, and these were people who either I talked to directly, like Miss Joan or Donnie, or who folks told me about, their aunts and uncles, their parents, and folks I encountered on the streets. So this is obviously an in-progress installation shot, but I included this just to kind of show you the scale of it. So when it was installed on the side of the house, you could be coming up the hill, up Bedford Avenue, and you would be greeted by this kind of fictive family, this fictive gathering of folks. And the installation was called The Vanguard because in my mind, even if it's not these particular individuals, they represent like that first line of who you think of, who's going to welcome you home, whether that's your physical home or whether that's like coming back home to the neighborhood that you call home. Continued a very similar style for the subsequent installations. So the Beat Keepers celebrates artists in the neighborhood. So many jazz greats, cultural greats have lived in or are from the Hill District, like a Mr. August Wilson, who's seated second from the right here. But there were a lot of people who, you know, word on the street said, you have to talk to them. Like, that's who we love, and this is who we revere, who's still here today. And so folks like that are included in this installation as well. And in the background, it's almost meant to replicate like an artist studio. So I had all these newspaper clippings that I wanted to incorporate in some way. So I lined the walls with those. And they kind of tell a chronological story of the Hill as it's written. So you have this kind of story that might be in black and white in print in the background, but you have the people who have articulated it and shared the culture and like the real story with the world in the forefront. The Anchors was a real collaboration between myself and Nadine, who is the executive director of the building that houses this installation. And she really wanted to celebrate elders in the neighborhood. So the Anchors stages this group of guys playing chess. It's a picture that I made at the library. I was pointing up, technically it is up the street from here, but it's like way up the street. This group of gentlemen playing chess, and she made these images of these women who are all like neighbors. They live very close to the building. And it's kind of like, you know, these are the folks who look out on, but also look out for the neighborhood. And then The Village was the final installation. And it's like the stoop. So if we had the living room, if we had like the den or the artist studio, then we had the porch, we have the stoop. And these folks, again, are from across time. We have the 1930s all the way through to today. They're people who are loved and beloved. One of them is someone I don't know. I found her carrying her books in the archives, but put together, they represent a little bit of all of us. Whether you recognize them or not, like, you know something about them, right? It feels like home. And this is who greets you when we're driving down Center Avenue, and making them larger than life, because that's who they are to the people that they know. These would work better with PowerPoint, but we're on a PDF right now. Basically, I had a lot of stories left that I wasn't able to share in the context of the installation. So I went back to the oral histories. Some of them were like 45 minutes, an hour long, hour and a half. And I just was like combing through them, trying to find like common themes, trying to find a way that they could be in conversation with each other. And then eventually I whittled like about 35, 40 of them down to these like 300 word clips, like little excerpts, and put those together on a website that you can't see here, but you could visit. It's hillhomecoming.com. And I really kind of just laid it out like a book. So each chapter unfolds both chronologically, but thematically. And as it goes on, it kind of tells this very people-centered history of the neighborhood. And then the final element is an interactive map. It's a story map that you can click around to see like not only different parts of the Hill District, because it's really one neighbor. It's one neighborhood comprised of many, but you can also explore via different themes like education, like style, like entertainment. That's all on hillhomecoming.com. So if On the Daily took a look at Pittsburgh on kind of a city level, Homecoming was more of a neighborhood focus. And the next project and final project that I'll be talking about takes more of a personal, like actual first person narrative look at a physical home, but home as it's embodied throughout the region. So this is where we find ourselves is my most recent completed body of work. It was started as a commission, actually. David Aresik at Silver Eye Center for Photography here in Pittsburgh reached out to me because a grant had come online. The Heinz Endowments wanted to give money to artists to create a body of work in response to all that was the summer of 2020. So between the uprisings and the pandemic, I guess they wanted to hear what folks have to say about it. So we were one of the partnerships that received the grant. And so they said, okay, go forth and make something. And I said, I don't have any clue what I'm gonna make. So I just started like walking through the city because in the summer of 2020, like that's kind of what you had to do. Like nothing was really, there was nowhere to go. Like, this is where I went. I went to my parents' backyard. We went, our family, every Sunday for dinner. We weren't going in the house. We were sitting in the backyard. And at that point, we were probably like masked up, even sitting at a distance from each other. So we went there every Sunday and I looked up at this view. This is my childhood bedroom window. And I was just like, you know, dang, like who would have thunk? I never would have thought when I was sleeping in this bedroom that we would be right here, right now. And the right here is the pandemic, but the right here is also this culmination of so many things that led us to that moment, this moment that we're in. And so it became a matter of, okay, what's the story that I'm trying to tell? How am I trying to find myself in this city that has often been so inhospitable to Black folks, but at the same time, I've found love here. I've found community. I've been supported. And so how can I reconcile those two things? How can I tell a story about a place, but still center the people? And so what came of it was really me revisiting what I had attempted with that On the Daily series. And it's a marriage of text and photo. But this time I'm the narrator, like, you know, it's me because I'm writing it out in my handwriting. So it's a twofold situation. There's an installation or like an exhibition version, and there's also a book version. I'll hit on both. But in the installation version, there's 19 panels. Each one has a photo of a specific place. I've written out the caption. I tell you where it is. I tell you kind of what I know it as. And then I wrote out kind of just a long, I guess it's like a long poem or like a long narrative. Each panel has a block of text and they're meant to be read kind of in conversation with each other. So I figured the easiest way to go about this was for me to actually read each panel. It won't take very long. And then I'll show you the installation view and talk a little bit about the book. So I won't read the captions though. You can kind of read them. It's the first pandemic summer. When we come to the yard for Sunday dinner, we remember home. Home is it tag and riding bikes and long walks to talk about everything and nothing at all. And home is morning shortcuts to school with Whammo or the news or 70s soul on the radio. These days, home is something to hold on to when nothing's like it was. Home is something to question when too much is like it's been. And home is something to search for as the spaces grow between us. Spaces that fill the neighborhoods that were raised while they called it renewal. Spaces that echo through my family's stories of their lives in the shadow of the mills that would also join the trail of ruins that stretches across this place. Pause for effect. So in case my story is lost in this city that breaks itself down, or buried in this place that makes itself over and over again, I'll tell them that we're more than these voids we've been made to inherit. I'll tell them that home is still where we can't wait to kick it, even when there's no one left inside in line. That home is still our high school, even without the lessons or the laughter inside to fill it. And home is still window shopping at the flyest shops, even when there's nothing left inside to see. Now there are signs that I read and signs that have been here all along. After all, it's a long loss that's brought us here. So we come home and we remember because the city will forget. So again, it's really trying to simulate movement through the city, but this time, like, I want you to come with me. I want to tell you what I see. I want to tell you what I remember about these places, what I feel about these places. It's of the time because some of it comments on the pandemic, the signage, but really as a gateway to thinking about, again, this longer set of activities and actions that's brought us to today. So the panels were arranged in this kind of like grid. I leave it to people to interpret why they feel I did that. I've actually heard people tell me, like, oh, you did this because, and I'm like, that's not what I had in mind, but that's cool. I mean, once it's up there, it's like, you know, choose your own adventure. So yeah, really with the panels, with the grid, you're meant to kind of find your way through the installation as I'm finding my way through the city. And the book version really kind of picks up where the installation leaves off. It's just a more in-depth exploration of these places and these stories. Again, you know, where in the past I was talking to other people about their experiences, this time around, I was encouraged to kind of turn the lens inward. And it kind of took my family, like my parents, my sister, and I on this journey through our own archives. My parents are photographers. My grandfather was a photographer. So there are thousands of pictures in the house. And we started to see that, like, without even knowing it, I was going to places to take pictures that we had pictures of in our own family archives. So it's thinking about, we've been here, my mother's side of the family has been in the city of Pittsburgh, in the region, for a very long time, like close to 100 years. And in all that time, like what's transpired. So the book, and I won't go into too much detail, I would say buy it, but it's sold out. So we're working on another run, but the book is just a longer version of that walk through the city. So it literally starts off this summer. I've been walking through the city. It gives you a view like this, which you could find. These are just pages, like scans from the book. You could find this walking through any part of the city of Pittsburgh. But it wasn't until editing this image that it occurred to me that on a street like this, on this left side that's like vacant now, there were probably like houses there once upon a time. This alley was probably lined with structures. And so a picture like this is kind of a gateway into the story that I'm trying to explore, where, you know, again, it starts with the pandemic, this signage, you know, stay away, stay apart from each other. But really looking at kind of scenes that feel like physically, like visually, that they parallel each other, but it kind of leads us into some of the discrepancies and some of the inequities that we find across the city of Pittsburgh. Kind of being capped off with an image like this. It's a storefront, like a door of a bustling business. Black Lives Matter. We demand an end to police brutality now. Like that's what greets you on the door. But then on a door, not too far down the road, it's boarded up, no trespassing, by order of Pittsburgh police, with like a sign to vote on it. So like, what does that say about, you know, what communities are valued by who? You know, what does that say about the police state? What does that say about so many things? And then, you know, a chunk of the book is marrying these archival images, again, from our family's archive with their current state now. So thinking about my family coming here from the South, the train station, the tracks that still exist, but the mills that used to line the tracks are long gone. And, you know, what's the story with that? Like, how do communities change around industry? Thinking about the house that my mom's family grew up in, her and her siblings. It's not there anymore, but we find this picture that my grandfather took of, you know, a few of the Thomas kids and their neighbors in the alley that, you know, for me, I don't have access to this memory, but he made the picture, right? We know, we have the evidence that it was there. My mom, myself, and my Aunt Bryn, you know, I asked them, like, can you drive me around? Can you narrate your experience growing up in Homestead, which is where some of these pictures were made? And we went to that back alley where that picture was just made. And we almost passed this up, but then someone in the car said, wait, stop. I think it was my mom. She said, like, those are our stairs. So these stairs are still left of the home that those memories were made in, but it's kind of like blink and you miss it. But it's there, right? I've never got to go inside that home. My life picked up in another family home in Homestead, but it's, again, thinking about as these losses are incurred, like, we still keep going. This is a story about love and legacy and what we pass on and how we sustain each other, probably more so than it is a story about what's been lost in terms of like a physical structure. But it does keep coming back to the loss. Like, I don't think that it's something that really couldn't be ignored. And so here, you know, you have a picture of me and my parents and my sister at my high school graduation in front of the Civic Arena, which was built on top of the raised hill district. And this is what it looked like in 2021 when I made this picture. The Civic Arena is gone too. So we just have these cycles of, again, destruction that people keep kind of pushing past. But I think the question has to be asked, like, why do we have to keep pushing past all of this? And the book ends on the porch. It's kind of meant to be like that walk happened over the course of a day, maybe it happened over the course of a year, but some sort of cycle has been completed. We come back home to this place where we share these stories together, where we make room for each other, where we see one another, and we find ways to keep going. And I think ultimately, so that's like the last of the projects that I had, but ultimately, those three things that I said at the beginning, that's what I come back to. And hopefully now you have a little bit of context to understand where I was coming from. I said that I think my work is about, one, going back to get the past, right? So that we understand who we come from and what we come from. And I think that helps us understand ourselves better, to understand that like we're connected to more than what we might see around us, what we might be able to discern in our current moment. As artists, as activists, as thinkers, as citizens of the world, you know, people connected to this conference, I think, you know, we all have a really powerful and unique capacity and opportunity to document what we see around us, to hold some space for the present. But I think we can never forget that, again, it's connected to something bigger. We're a part of a lineage that's brought us here. I said the second thing that I do in my work is preserve the present for today. I think that's how we build connections with each other, because I'm talking about the city of Pittsburgh, I'm talking about Western Pennsylvania, but just like I learned in Paris, like this is not the only place that we're having these conversations. So when we start to understand that some of the injustices that we face, but also some of the ways that we create community stretch beyond, you know, local or national boundaries or borders, that's when I think we can start to, as my dad has said before, like do something about our plight. And the third thing was preserving today for tomorrow. So I think about all the stories, I think about all that like I've and we've inherited, how people kept those precious moments for us. Like, how can we do that today for future generations so they know who they are and where they come from? And yeah, it's not easy, but I say this to you as I say it to myself. I think we should be encouraged because I think this work is important. We see it's as black and white as it is in these pictures. Our communities are changing daily, and daily people try to tell us that we were never there, but we know we were there. So how do we keep that evidence and pass it down and keep moving into a better future? Thank you.
So just some tips on managing hybrid Q&A. We do have a chat function, so I can kind of keep my eye on the chat too.
Okay.
And if people want to ask questions through chat on Zoom, they're welcome to do that. And then if you want to ask questions here, I'm just going to ask Njaimeh that you repeat the question.
Yes.
So the interpreters can hear it and also translate the question.
Cool.
So the floor is open. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess most of just have like curiosity, but you in any of these processes like document the oppositional side of this, like the contractors or like the condo builders or type of people, they do encounter that. And
That's a
how do
really
you
good-
deal with that?
That's a great question. I've never had that question before. No, I didn't. Oh, sorry, you just said it. You just said to repeat the. So the question. No, it's cool. So the question was, throughout these processes and projects, did I ever like document the like opposing side, or, you know, the developers, contractors, maybe people who are these are my words, like kind of making the city anew? And my answer is no, I didn't. I never even really thought to. I was so keyed in on talking to people that it felt like weren't being heard necessarily, like outside of our immediate networks. I didn't think about talking to folks who feel like they already have the reins of power. But it's something to think about now.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Also, one curiosity, the stories you were collecting, you were using also the photos, the old photos, to collect the stories, so people would build their narratives on the old photos and the past and the present.
Yeah, exactly. So the comment was, or the question was I using the photos, the old photos that I was collecting to kind of use with the narratives and the stories that I was collecting to kind of build that that connection between the past and the present? Is that the?
If the people from the community
Mhm.
were seeing the photos
Mhm.
and making narratives on those photos, so they will rebuild the work themselves, rebuilding their past through seeing the
Oh,
photos.
okay. So people in these communities maybe, would see these old photos and kind of help rebuild or rethink about their past using these images. Thank you for that comment. And I think, yeah, that has happened in some of the projects that I've worked on, even beyond these ones that I shared. I do think old photos, they trigger memories. Nostalgia is very real. And part of the reason I started asking people about those photos is because there was a lot I couldn't find in the archives, right? In history books, they probably weren't looking for so-and-so's grandma's house, but they have a picture of grandma's house, and grandma's house represents a lot of houses in the neighborhood. Like, we can see what the houses looked like. We can see what these blocks look like. So there's all this information stored in our family photo albums that you might look past twice, but it's visual information that might be written about other places as a footnote, like, oh, there's this street, oh, there was that school, but it's in somebody's house right now, a picture of that street or that school. I hope that makes sense. Is that?
Yes.
Thank you for that.
That evidence to review the history of the city as well, the policy that space, the urban space, and people's lives at the same time.
Right. So the comment was just using those photos as evidence, as a ways to like rebuild the history of a city or of a place. And I guess, yeah, that's kind, yes. But that was part of the intention, I guess. So you just put it way better than I was thinking of it.
So, sorry, one Zoom question as well. So the Zoom question was just about how people react. So this is from Ricardo Valencia. So thanks for the presentation. And it says, like, were people surprised to see themselves, their neighborhoods, what were some of the reactions about?
Thank you for that question. The reactions were very warm, very positive. So so I'll say two things. I want to be clear about the fact that people shared things with me, and then I kind of interpreted them and shared them back to the world. So in a lot of ways, I was a filter. So there's nothing like going to the source. I am not the source. Like, I have to defer to the people who actually shared these stories with me. So in a lot of ways, like, I, particularly with that homecoming project, like, I put it in a package. I put that book, the book, This Is Where We Find Ourselves, in a package, but I always defer to the actual people who lived those experiences. But having said that, I tried to work from like a permission-based place. So I went back and I showed everyone the blurb that I wanted to put on the website and asked, like, is this okay? Is there anything you want to add? I asked them if it was okay. Like, we had, you know, proper forms that they signed off on to have their images and their words reproduced. And yeah, people reacted really warmly. I mean, yeah. I mean, if people didn't, they didn't tell me. So there probably were people who didn't like it. But I think that people were moved by the fact that, yes, sometimes it was their neighbor that they knew that was like 10 feet tall or 20 feet high on the stairs. But sometimes it was just someone that like looked like them or reminded them of someone they knew, and that meant something too. So yeah, people responded very warmly to that homecoming project, and really to the project overall. I've been very fortunate to have positive receptions, knock on wood.
Well, in January, I wish you would show my favorite 3 photographs.
This is my mother.
Are a photo that you took near the waterfront in Homestead. And your dad took when they were demolishing the steel mills in Homestead. That there's a picture of your great-great-great-grandmother's friends at the same intersection. All these pictures are at the same intersection before they demolished that area to build up the steel mills. So it's just incredible. So some of the pictures are dated back to the 1930s. Then it jumps to 1989, and then 2020. Same place.
That's a lot to try to reiterate. No, thanks, Mom. So the comment was, I had gone to this intersection in Homestead where my mom's family is from, and I made a picture of the railroad tracks. And weeks later, I go to my parents' house and my mom shows me a picture. She did not know that I took this picture. She shows me a picture from the 1930s of a group of Muslim women connected to our family, like friends of the family then, taken at that same exact spot that I had made that picture without knowing that that picture of them existed. So it started to feel like the universe was like guiding me to these places to get this evidence, right? To collect this evidence, to match the past with the present. And the other picture my mom mentioned is my dad took a picture of, in 1989, of them demolishing the steel mills that I was able to use in the book to show where the steel mills like used to be. So evidence, you know, being in your archive, in your home.
My question is, how much of this work for you seems spiritual? Just going off of what your mom was saying and just that coincidence. How much do you feel that it's like almost like I see it as I hear it, I see it as ancestral memory. How much of this work do you feel like it's spiritual?
Thank you for that question. I smiled. So the question was, how much of this work do I feel like is ancestral memory? Like I'm gonna paraphrase this, but kind of like being guided by the ancestors. And that's what the whole last section of my book is about. I'd literally just say, it feels like that. It feels like their ancestors saying, come here, just take a moment here, like we're with you, and we might not be here, and the places that we inhabited might not be here, but there's something for you here. There's something of you here. And I started to feel that very strongly, especially with this last project, that this is where we find ourselves. But even I feel it when I look at Teenie Harris images, like, again, this evidence. it's very difficult, I think, sometimes to, you see a picture of all this that used to be here, and then it's just not. It's very difficult to process that, to understand how this happened. But what I said in the book is, I feel like our ancestors left part of themselves in these spaces for us, and we just have to go like find them and try to hear what they're trying to tell us. And I think that is what has kept us going and what is going to get us to the next thing. Thank you.
I guess I asked this question because I feel like we do this so respectfully and we're good at this, but how do you navigate working with arts institutions and art spaces who unfortunately are so often very complicit in things like gentrification? How do you navigate like working with them, presenting to them, and because gathering material and like representing it through these spaces? Like, what's your like your thought process or like actual practical process of navigating?
That's a good question. So, man, I wish you all could just, it's hard to.
Yeah.
The question was, how do I navigate dealing with and working with like arts institutions, other organizations that might be perpetuating some of the harms that that are kind of like going on in the community, but how do I kind of try to do the work respectfully and with some integrity? Developing story. I think, so I've been very fortunate to work with organizations that feel very aligned with what I want to do and how I want to move through the world. So that homecoming project was my first public art project ever. I'd only really been working as an artist for a year or two prior to doing that. So the Office of Public Art here in Pittsburgh, I mean, they are on the ground actively working to cultivate systems that promote like working across, like working with community as opposed to like a top-down approach. And so working with them kind of helped model positive ways to do community engaged public artwork. And that's something that I've been able to kind of build on through learning from and listening to community members, but it's not easy, because at the end of the day, you have to make a living, and it's a delicate balance of how you do that and stick to your morals. And I think at the end of the day, again, I've been very fortunate, but if it's enough money, all the money's funny. Any large chunk of money is going to be connected to some like less than savory or probably like inhumane practice, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't have so much money. So, sometimes maybe it's just a matter of, well, what can I do with this platform? This sounds like way more self-righteous than I mean it to, but like, that's a great question, because I think it's something that a lot of us actively are navigating. How to move in a good way, or how to do the right thing in less than right circumstances. So that was not definitive, but you know what I did? So for my business, I have a production company where I do like photo and video work. I started out doing like events and headshots, and that was cool, but I was like, I don't feel like this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing in the world. And so I stopped doing that for a while. And for like a year, I tried to write a mission statement. I tried to say like, what is it that I want to do? Like, what is my vision? And at the end of that year, I had a mission statement, and it was like sorcery. The jobs that came in changed. it was like, I said it before, but like putting an intention out. And it was like watching what came back. So maybe that's part of it. How can we put our intentions out there, like try to align ourselves with what we want to see? Thanks for
So when
you.
you see your talk, I was wondering also about what happens after, because when these people leave these places and places are destroyed, all the solidarity networks, the neighborhood networks that are so strong for the people's lives, they are broken because people go to other places. And did you ever document it also on the process of after leaving the places, or you think about this possibility?
Thank you for that question. So the question was, you know, when places are destroyed, demolished, deconstructed, and people, I'm paraphrasing, go their different ways, you know, a lot of these community networks and relationships are broken. So have I ever like looked at that? Have I ever, you know, maybe talked to people about that or focused on that in my work? Thank you for that question. And I think the answer is yes, because I think it's inevitable, because we're living in the fallout of a lot of these places that used to exist that don't exist anymore. And I think the fact that, you know, for that homecoming project, everyone was talking about the Hill District neighborhood, but a lot of people didn't live in the Hill District anymore, right? They had scattered, they had moved other places. But thinking about that spiritual piece, like that is the spiritual home, right? That is the place that people come back to, sometimes physically, but mostly in here, right? That's what's always there. So I think that it's a very real thing that, especially over generations, we've been made to be distant from each other. We don't have that proximity that we used to. And that has very real repercussions. So I think a lot of my work, I never thought about it like this really, is I'm thinking about how can we come back together, right? If we knew that we came from this same place, right? That gives us a common bond. If we knew that other people in other places experience this loss or this displacement too, that gives us a common bond. Like, how can we start to repair some of these broken bonds? Because they matter, we feel them like very tangibly. So how can we come back together? I hope that, yeah. I feel like all these are so open-ended, but you are asking great questions. Thank you.
Concerning the demographic changes, like migrations and especially climate change, Facebooks and just urbanization, all these trends, they're going to continue to displace people, have construction be a necessity in our life. What can we learn from your works to make this transition process easier, considering you're going to have to repeat it over and over again for the next 20?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, like, given things like climate change and just the fact that migration or maybe even forced migration just kind of seems to be a way of life. It's something that feels inevitable. What can my work, help me out here, teach us or show us about? What can we learn from like some of the work that I've done in terms of like how to navigate these migrations or relocations? That's a good question.
Think about keeping these communities together. How can that be managed in the face of physically moving people?
Right. How can communities be kept together in the face of physically moving people? That one was verbatim. That's a good question. I think something that I think about a lot is that change in and of itself isn't bad, right? Change is natural, like everything must change, Remember that song? Will? You still love that song. Sorry. Yeah, change is inevitable. I think one of the things that I come back to, like on the surface of my work, is why is it that change so disproportionately benefits like one or a few groups of people? And we know why. Like we know capitalism and we know racism and sexism. We know all the isms that explain that, but I'm really not sure how to keep those, like, again, kinship networks in place when you're physically moving people apart. I guess a low-hanging fruit answer right now is like technology is helpful, but a lot of people don't have access to the technology that would help them, stay connected to each other. So that's maybe not so low-hanging.
I was thinking about the art installations that you put up
Uh-huh.
in the public, and I think that's really excellent for preserving those memories, even for preserving some of those networks within the people who are living in those areas, the diaspora of people who moved out of those areas, they might not be expecting.
Right. Yeah, if you're not in like physical proximity to a public art installation, it probably won't resonate the same with you because you're not accessing it in that way that's going to help you reconnect to the history. I was actually having this conversation earlier today, and we were talking about like, what is the function of public art, right? Like, sure, I guess a goal is like to look good, or like, you want it to have a strong presentation, but like, is there a way that it can function as a way of, there are terms like placemaking and space keeping, but like something to galvanize around or something to point to say like, this is where we were, this is who we are, and how can we move forward? Honestly, these are things that I'm really mulling over because I think it's, obviously I just did a whole presentation on how important these connections are, right? But I wonder sometimes, like, is that flowery language if the material conditions of people's lives aren't changing for the better? What is the function of these stories, right? Yes, they help us connect to each other, but like, how can they be fire in our bellies to like keep that push, keep that fight, to understand that nothing that we're encountering now is really new. Like when I was in the archives, like there were articles I was reading about displacement and gentrification from the 1920s that sounded like they were written in 2016, 17 when I was reading them. So what's gonna break the cycle, right? In a perfect world, maybe one of these, not my installations per se, but maybe a public art installation becomes a space where people can go to organize or to, and we've seen that happen in the world, but I guess I'm just thinking about how do we make that jump to really making moves in the world and doing actions and pushing back in a way that is going to break these cycles of inequity. And yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking about it every day, I guess. Thank you for the question.
After your projects, for instance, the installations, do you ever this experience of working with schools, with kids, because I'm thinking about new generations, maybe all the story, but the new kids, they don't know about their, like, from their stories, story of their families.
Yeah.
Maybe this would be a way of raising consciousness on this issue and the changes that the families and generations face.
Mm-hmm.
or do you tend to do this kind of work with the community?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The question was, have I worked with schools or like with young people in any capacity to like start to pass these stories down? Yeah, for future generations, which, yeah, that's definitely something that's important to me. And the short answer is yes, but it's something that I should do more. I think, especially starting out, it was such a relief to like, you finish a project and it's like, whew, it's done. But I'm learning that finishing a project is just one stage of a project. Like finishing the making, there's a whole nother part of it that's engagement and sharing. And that's the part that I really do struggle with. Yeah, I have to like push myself more to do that. So the short answer is I want to do that more because you're right, like it can't stop with me, it can't stop with us. It doesn't make sense for it doesn't make sense for just like previous generations had things in like boxes or like, you know, personal archives. All this stuff is on my hard drive. Where does it go, right? How do we pass it down? How do we share? So that's something that I think about as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome. I just wanted to make a comment from Amanda Boston kind of related to your comment earlier about like what are some ways that we operate networks. And so she says family reunions are a good example. But that also, I mean, I was sort of thinking about your question, Nikki, about like how, and your comment about the laughter. So how do we think about framing public artworks as not just the product, but sort of frameworks for ongoing engagement and creative spaces for empowerment?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the family reunions because I also think about class reunions. So my high school that is no longer in existence, the building is there, but it's not a school anymore, Shenley High School. My friend, who I think is on the call, Melinda, she sent me a text where they're having like an all class reunion over the summer. So things like that, like ways to come back together, right? And people, you know, it's this legendary place. So there's big buy-in for something like that. So maybe thinking about what are these benchmarks, what are these landmarks from our past, be they physical or experiential, like these shared experiences that we could kind of rally around and bring new generations into to kind of pass on those stories, because it might happen in the house, it might happen within families, but it might not, because you're busy like living your everyday lives. So how can we create moments and like real intentional spaces to do this transfer of knowledge? And maybe that's a function of public art, these places to, even if that transfer doesn't happen at those specific locations, maybe like you said, they inspire a conversation like, hey, did you know so-and-so? And boom, as soon as someone says, there's certain like keywords or like sentence starters that, you know, somebody's about to go like off on a tangent or like into a deep story. But that's how we learn, right? And then that's how we keep it going. So thank you for that comment. I've asked some good ones.
I got it. That's fine. That's like all.
Like angsty.
So please join me in thanking Njaimeh. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you all so much. Thank you everyone in the Zoom world for joining.